strikes midnight and I'm all by myself. I work that combination on my secret hideaway shelf, and I pull out some Fritos corn chips, a Dr. Pepper, and an old moon pie. I sit back in glorious expectation of a genuine junk food high. In the daytime I'm Mr. Natural, just healthy as I can be. But at night I'm a junk food junkie. Good Lord, have pity on me. That's right.
Junk Food Junkie by Larry Groach. I played that when I was a DJ back in the Stone Age. I played that platter. Anyway, Junk Food Junkie, call the nanny state. Time for an intervention. We must save him, the junkie, from himself. And that's just the problem, isn't it? We become a society that lives in fear over what we eat. The latest food research data on what makes us fat, what makes us thin, what causes cancer has us obsessed with yo-yo diets and the pursuit of the superfood holy grail. And each new groundbreaking study seems to contradict the previous one. Remember when we were all terrified of eggs, and both the media and food companies were fueling the hysteria? It's all laid out in a new book, Fear of Food, A History of Why We Worry About What We Eat, by retired Professor Harvey Levenstein, Professor Emeritus, McMaster in Hamilton. Harvey, thank you so much for writing the book and for joining us. Take us back to the 70s, because that's when I think the alarm bells started to really ring.
Well, that's when the so-called diet heart theory rose and just permeated all of our consciousness. And that was the idea that saturated fats caused the so-called epidemic of heart attacks. We keep going through these epidemics, and it's easy to forget it. Then in those days, it was an epidemic of heart attacks, which for them really were caused mainly because people were living longer. The scientific basis for the theory really originated on the most flimsy study of a comparison of heart attack rates between poor Neapolitans, poor people who lived in Naples, Italy, and well-off businessmen in Minnesota and Boston. The scientists concluded, and in this case the medical people particularly concluded, that the cause of this disparity, that these Italians had much fewer heart attacks than the well-off businessmen, was their diet, and particularly the fact that they didn't eat as much steak and eggs and things like that that contained saturated fat. From this, they went on and did other studies in Crete and eventually throughout the world that tried to compare, sought to compare the diets of people with high and low heart attacks, and of course seemed to confirm their theory. These studies now look very, very shaky. Indeed, they look worthless from the point of view today, but they turned out to be real moneymakers because the producers of vegetable oils in particular, and the producers of margarine, which were low in saturated fat, jumped on these things to promote this fear of saturated fat. Along with that, they were joined by the American Heart Association, which for reasons of its own had switched from really supporting research into heart disease to supporting awareness of the lifestyle factors that created heart attacks. This allowed them to get much more publicity, to be in the public eye much more, and to raise much more money. The fact was that the government was now pouring millions of dollars into research into heart disease, much more than they were, and so they carved out this niche, which turned out to be extremely lucrative for them, and indeed did very well for the people running the foundation, whose salaries grew enormously. So everyone had a stake in promoting this diet heart theory. it continued through the 70s and 80s. It was what they call the reigning paradigm. That was what everyone bought into. And if you were a scientist trying to get research money to disprove it, you had a pretty rough time, because most of the committees deciding these things were dominated by people who subscribed to the diet hard theory. So as a result, today, it still persists today, even though it has been largely disproved, we still walk around saying, oh boy, you eat that steak and it's a one-way ticket to the cardiac ward, or this whipped cream is going to, send me palpitating into the whatever. We still believe this, even though it not only hasn't been disproved, but in some cases, with regard to margarine, it's been proved that the diets that were recommended as a result of this, the low-fat diets that were recommended as a result of low-saturated fat, I should say, diet, may have been dangerous to your health. Margarine was full of polyunsaturates, which became enemy number 1 or enemy number 2 some years later. Low-fat diets led to a great increase in diets with carbohydrates, with simple carbohydrates, which are now enemy number 1, having displaced trans fats, which are enemy number 3, and so on and so forth.
Harvey, I love your enthusiasm. If I could just get in with a quick question or two. Challenging the diet hard orthodoxy in those days was as non-productive for certain people as it is today for some people to challenge climate change orthodoxy. We get that. I'm wondering about the money changing hands, because I do remember in the 70s when I was spinning those old platters like Junk Food Junkie. I also recall that everybody and his brother, they were looking for the blessing of the American Heart Association. All kinds of food companies were looking for that. Was there money changing hands? Was the American Heart Association ever being paid for its blessing?
Oh yes, there were big bucks being exchanged. The American Heart Association developed the system of giving its approval, giving a heart, which I'm sure you've all seen in the States. We have a version of it here, but it's not quite as nefarious. Being able to put a heart, saying heart healthy and so on your product that costs many thousands of dollars a year to do. It's not a case of them having, in an unbiased fashion, gone through all of these foods and say, oh, this is good and this is bad for you, so on. It's, no, you pay for it if you want to have it. And some of the most apparently unhealthy, or let's say unhealthy looking foods have had this, this heart sticker stuck on them because they paid. They could also,
Professor Levenstein,
yeah.
that's all the time we have at this point. We'll have you back down the road. Good luck with your new book, Fear of Food. Appreciate it very much, sir.
Oh, well, thank you for having me.